Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the GM. It is your guy, Boulanger. Up next, dark horse, sleeper, and champ, AFC North. Let's talk. So today is that day, man, where every team around the NFL is getting ready to kick off training camp. It's where everyone is going to be taking that journey, making an attempt to get to Santa Clara. And so there are several teams in the AFC who have Santa Clara hopes. I think those teams are the Ravens, of course, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And every team in the AFC North has a rightful claim to hope. Hope that this is that year. Hope that they've put enough together as it pertains to their roster to get the job done. And so we're going to take a journey around the NFL. We're going to deal with every division, but today we're focusing on the North. And so let's get into this thing. So coming into this off season and now the season, or at least the preparation for the season, right? The Ravens have had the hype. Quietly, they've been ascending up the Super Bowl rankings, right? But before you can really win a Super Bowl, the goal has to be winning the division. Now, the Baltimore Ravens have owned the AFC North for the last two seasons, and many believe that they could own the AFC North for a third season in a row. The question is, who's a dark horse and who's a sleeper to overtake the Ravens? The Baltimore Ravens have the best quarterback in the division, regardless of ranking. We have the best running back room in the division. We have the best tight end room in the division. We have probably the best secondary in the division. And we probably have a comparable linebacking corps in the division, led by Roquan Smith, of course. But is that going to be enough to be a three-peater at the top of the AFC North? We have momentum from last year, right? We finally got over that Pittsburgh Steelers hump in the last two games of last season. I think it was week 13 or 14 where we knocked them off, and then we beat them again in the playoffs. So we definitely don't have that Pittsburgh Steelers fear of years past. I don't think they're the ghost that haunts us anymore. But nevertheless, right, on paper, we're legit. But when you translate paper to the field, will the Baltimore Ravens get it done? Will the pieces to the puzzle that seem to have finally come together, will it be enough? Will the addition of D-Hop offensively be enough to elevate them offensively? Will the second year of Daniel Falele and the second year of Roger Rosengarten being starters, will that be enough on the right side of that offensive line? Will Voorhees take that step in his third season as he is healthy to be a permanent fixture at left guard? Will Ronnie Stanley be the guy at left tackle who continues to solidify himself as one of the better left tackles in the league? Right? All of those are questions that have to be played out on the field. Will Derrick Henry put up another 1,900 yards? Certainly not. And with the talent that we have on the offensive side of the ball, we don't need him. The Ravens do not need him to put up another 1,900 yards. But will he stay healthy once again and be one of the league leaders in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns? Will Keaton Mitchell finally be healthy and jump back into this rotation and provide spark out of the backfield? Will Justice Hill continue his steady play as a runner and as a receiver? Will Mark Andrews have a bounce back season after a playoff letdown? Will Isaiah Likely ascend? Will he finally displace Mark Andrews as the number one tight end, as this is probably Andrews' last season? You see, all of those things are going to be necessary for the Baltimore Ravens to three-peat and put themselves in position to get the chip. When we jump to the defensive side of the ball, right? Will the loss of Michael Pierce be very noticeable? Or will the young talent be suitable fill-ins, be suitable replacements? Will this edge room finally showcase a number one level edge rusher, a guy who can defeat block, a guy who can terrorize quarterbacks and finish plays? When we jump to the middle of this defense, will Roquan find a running mate who is suitable to pair with him and dominate defensively? And will the secondary be enough? With the veterans, the talent, the Pro Bowlers, will it be enough to combat some of the elite receivers in this division? Those are questions. But on paper, the answer to all of those questions is yes. The Baltimore Ravens have exactly what they need. And they're out of excuses. There is no more excuses that can be made if the Baltimore Ravens don't clinch this division, clinch a top 4 seed in the AFC, and compete for a Super Bowl. But when you look at the rest of this division, Cleveland sometimes comes off as the laughingstock. Right now, the Cleveland Browns have 4 or 5 quarterbacks under contract. At the top of that list, you have the veteran Joe Flacco. Behind him, you have another veteran that they traded for in Kenny Pickett. And behind Pickett, you have 2 rookies in Shedeur Sanders and Daniels. And then bringing up the rear is Deshaun Watson, who is a non-factor. So what will they do at quarterback? Right? Will they trot out the wily veteran who is a crowd favorite? Or will he be replaced at some point during this season by Shedeur Sanders, who has sold $250 million worth of jerseys? And what does that say? That say he has the crowd and fan support in Cleveland. With the replacement of Nick Chubb with Judkins, who has some off-field complications, will that running game come to form? Will Jerry Jeudy take another step with questions at quarterback? And will this offensive line stay steady? When you jump to the defense side of the ball for the Cleveland Browns, they're solid at every level. Led by, quite possibly, take 5. Led by quite possibly the number 1 pass rusher in the entire league, who just got paid an enormous amount of money to stay in Cleveland, Myles Garrett. They added a young stud like Mason Graham to patrol the middle. And they have other complementary pieces that they added last year in the draft to solidify this defensive front. They're going to be solid up front, led by quite possibly the number 1 pass rusher in the entire league, who just got paid an enormous amount of money to stay in Cleveland, Myles Garrett. They added a young stud like Mason Graham to patrol the middle. And they have other complementary pieces that they added last year in the draft to solidify this defensive front. They're going to be solid up front. They have solid linebacker play. And the secondary with Newsome and Ward, they're going to always be scrappy, competitive, and gritty. I think the Cleveland Browns are the dark horse in the AFC North. Now wait, don't get up in arms. Don't lose your mind. What I'm saying is legit. This Cleveland Browns defense is going to be a top 4 or 5 unit. Barring any type of injury, that's what they're going to be. And so if you can play defense, speaking of Cleveland, and you can run the ball, and you just want to complement it with the pass, that's enough to compete for an AFC North title. Last year's roster in Cleveland was not as good as this year's roster in Cleveland. And they took one off of the Baltimore Ravens. So it's not a situation where we can just dismiss the Cleveland Browns. I believe them to be the dark horse of the AFC North. Now, there may be a lot of things that have to happen for Cleveland to take a surge from the bottom to the top and be a riser and be competitive. But I believe the Cleveland Browns can be the last year version of the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had questions at quarterback, who had questions at wide receiver, and continued to put a big-time defense on the field. I think that could be the Cleveland Browns of this season. I think the sleeper in this division is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now that leaves the Cincinnati Bengals on the outside looking in for a division title. and maybe even for the playoffs. But let's get into the Pittsburgh Steelers for a moment. I think the addition of Aaron Rodgers is not really an upgrade over Russell Wilson from last season, but a lateral step. But I think there's other forces at play in Pittsburgh that make them a legit sleeper to capture a division title. Now, they have some issues, but what they're going to put on the field is going to be solid. Aaron Rodgers can still throw the ball. He's not as mobile. He's not as dynamic. But if he can be consistent, that's going to be enough in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has a solid offensive line that they've been building over the last couple of seasons. The Pittsburgh Steelers are going to have a really good run game with the addition of Caleb Johnson and Jalen Warren. They added DK Metcalf, basically replacing George Pickens. And then they're going to have some other pieces to go along beside him. They just made a trade and brought in Juno Smith, a Pro Bowler, a former Pro Bowler, let me say it that way. And they still have Firemouth. And so when you look at their offense, you're not as frightened, but you don't have to be, right? The teams in the AFC North don't have to be scared of the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, but what you're going to see from Pittsburgh is consistency. You're going to see them run the ball and complement it with the pass. That's what you're going to see in Pittsburgh. The defensive side of the ball for the Pittsburgh Steelers is where the noise is going to be made. Led by TJ Watt, maybe the second best pass rusher in the league, not just in the division, but in the entire league. They added Derek Harmon, a young stud who's going to patrol the middle of the field, very similar to what the Cleveland Browns have done. I think Patrick Queen takes another step in the middle of that defense. I do not know who his running mate is going to be. Oh, yes, I do. Wilson. Wilson's going to be his running mate, forming a solid duo. And then when you jump to the secondary, adding Darius Slay is an upgrade over Dante Jackson from last season. You got Joey Porter Jr., who's a young stud, a lot of length, solid speed. And although they lost Nika Fitzpatrick, they still have some solid safety play, Thornhill and also Elliott. And I think Pittsburgh is going to put a solid team on the field. And we understand that all Pittsburgh wants to do is run the ball, play solid defense, and complement it with the pass. Very similar to every team in the AFC North, not named the Bengals. But I do think the Pittsburgh Steelers is the sleeper. Pittsburgh played competitive all year long until the wheels kind of fell off near the end of the season. But I think this season, they're going to come in, they're going to know what they're going to want to do. They're going to know who they are. And I think they're going to be a team that tries to execute it week in and week out. The thing about the Pittsburgh Steelers is this. A couple of people in that organization are on what I would call a goodbye tour, right? Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers. This is Aaron Rodgers' last season. So you know he's going to want to go out with a bang. And then I think this is also Mike Tomlin's last season if they don't make any noise in the playoffs beyond the first round. So I think Mike Tomlin is coaching for his job. Aaron Rodgers is finishing up his career. And I think that's going to be some added motivation. And everybody knows everybody in this division, so there will be no tricks to this trade. And that moves us to the last team in this division, which I didn't name as a dark horse or a sleeper. That's the Cincinnati Bengals. I think the Bengals are either going to be boom or bust, right? Boom, they win the division. Bust, they don't make the playoffs at all, just like last season. I think the Cincinnati Bengals have pushed all of their chips into the middle of the table at this point, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. We know Joe Burrow was paid. Jamar Chase just became the highest paid wide receiver in the entire league. And his running mate, T. Higgins, also got paid this offseason. They have almost, if not over, $100 million per season cap-wise in those three players, which does not leave much room for the advancement of any other position group. But nevertheless, they're going to have a top 3 wide receiver room. They're going to try and establish a run game this season. And then they're going to also see what the offensive line is going to look like as they've been trying to build that position group over the last 3 or 4 seasons to protect Joe Burrow. We know what Joe Burrow is, leading the league in passing yards last season. He definitely has the capacity to do that once again. They have bookend tackles, both 6'8" monsters in Orlando Brown and also Amarius Mims. The question will be, will that offensive line stay healthy? If that offensive line stays healthy, Joe Burrow stays upright, the Bengals have a chance to be a boom and clinch the division. Because there's going to be a lot of questions beyond Trey Hendrickson on their defense, right? I'm not going to pretend like I know who's on that defense. I'm not going to pretend like I know who plays linebacker or even in that secondary. But that was the weak point last season, and that's probably going to be the weak point this season. I believe that the Bengals have a clear identity. They're going to be an offensive team and hope that the rookies that they added, the young talent they've added over the last couple of seasons will be enough. And I believe they could. I believe that if the Bengals can hold teams in that 21 to 24 point range, which is a lot of points, they have a chance to outscore any team. And I think that's what they're going to bank on. That's what they banked on all the way back in 2021, I believe, when they went to the Super Bowl. Offensive team and played just good enough defense. Now they have a new defensive coordinator. That may be a factor. But I think as we look at this division, I think the Baltimore Ravens absolutely are the favorites, and they should, on paper, repeat as champs. I think the Cleveland Browns, which many people in the league overlook, are going to be better than what we think. Especially if this defense repeats as a top-end talent, especially if this offensive line holds up and they can figure out what they're doing at the running back position. Cleveland is going to be competitive. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are the sleeper. I think they could absolutely hang around all season long and strike at the end of the season. And then the Bengals, boom or bust. Who knows what they'll be. But I don't think it's going to be for the Bengals this slide into the playoffs late. I think they either are at the top of the AFC North or they miss the whole thing altogether. So, man, let me know what you guys want me to know about the AFC North. Do you think that Cleveland is a dark horse, the Steelers are a sleeper, or would you rearrange something? Cleveland Browns fans, Bengals fans, Steelers fans, stand up in the comment section and let me know. I'm your guy, Boulanger, and until we get to the next division, I'm out.